getting started.
Right, give me 1 second.
Oh wait, we're not getting started yet. Hi everybody, I'm Chris Rickert. I own LJ's Books right down the road in Dormont. We are a science fiction, fantasy, horror specialty store, and so when I come to events like this, they ask me to introduce you to all of these fine authors. I'm happy to say all of these people have done events in my bookstore, which is awesome. This is Nelson Pyles, Matt Demas, Christine Soltis, all phenomenal authors. They're going to read a little bit for you, and then we're going to do a Q&A as time permits. And I believe that Christine Soltis is going to get us started. If each of you could just tell us a little bit about yourself before you read, that would be fantastic.
Okay, well, hello everybody, and thanks for coming in. My name's Christine Soltis. I've been writing for about 9.5 years now. I'm going on the 10th year. I've been writing predominantly fiction. Lately, I've been moving into a non-fiction realm. I also like to write travel articles and things like that. I like science a lot. So I have a lot of horror stuff that I originated with or started with. So I'm also moving into science fiction and things like that. And the first book that I'm going to read to you from is called Final Moon, and it came out in 2011. And then after that, I'm just going to read a short clip from my newest article, or book that came out in January. Okay. And this is a story. Final Moon is a story about a young man who has a curse, and on the full moon, he doesn't turn into a werewolf. He becomes a killer. And this came out with Matthew Beltry. We had a screenplay that we started with. And at this scene right now, he's struggling with trying to control what he is. And it's just going to be a couple pages for this one. Okay? Spike opened the door and gasped. His eyes began to blur again. He blinked harshly, trying to force away the change in his senses. The full moon had declared its place above. This cotton ball dotted the sky with strings of white permeating from it. The transformation was beginning, and standing directly in front of him was his father. Spike gasped repeatedly, sounding like he was choking. Adrenaline was turning into hostility inside of him. This surfacing violence begged to push itself into the world. "No!" Spike shouted. Desperation shook his voice. His body trembled without understanding. The cloudy cotton streaks continued to trail from its larger entity. He couldn't blink it away. This couldn't be happening. The moon had already come this month. Spike ducked back into the cottage, holding onto the side walls for support. Now, Bill's body blocked the moon, but only halfway. Against his will, Spike's face suddenly distorted, morphing to the wide snarl of a monster's visage. His mouth dropped open as he tried desperately to clamp his jaw shut. The horrid thought slowly ran through him. Tonight is the full moon. There were so many moons, so many days, so many weeks, and so many months that they seemed to blur together, just like his visuals. Hadn't the moon just been here? Spike tried to fight the churning inside his body, but he could never stop the transformation he constantly tried to control. His father stood there, speaking unheard words, staring at him and knowing something was amiss. But Spike heard nothing he said. All words were lost in blurs as Spike tried desperately to steady himself. In a gargled voice, Spike frantically shouted, "No, get out of here. You have to leave." Bill's worried face intensified the wrinkles that creased his forehead. Deep worry winced his heart. Now the words were clear to Spike's ears. "What? Why, Spike? What's wrong? What's the matter? Your face." Spike moved towards him now. His hand reached outward, displaying the veins that seemed to bubble up from his skin as if the blood was boiling inside of him. And to Spike, it felt like it was. Heat forced its way through him as he pushed forward, wanting to send his father out the door. But the heat, the cold warmth of the moon, wouldn't let him. Instead, he fell to his knees in pain, clutching at his waist. Lava fire seemed to erupt inside of him, and his organs felt like they were pinching, squeezing together along a fire pit. Never before had he felt the pain of the transformation so intensely. Pain fused into every part of him. Usually, he just let go and became what he was. But now he had to control it. He had to stop this. Bill's worry deepened. He moved towards Spike, leaving the moon only slightly blocked now. Bill reached out to place a hand on his shoulder. A shrill cry of pain rippled through the younger man's chest, causing the farmer to jump back in fear. Bill's voice trembled as he spoke. "Son, are you okay?" Spike didn't dare look up at him. He didn't want to see his father. He didn't want his father to see what was happening to him. This permutation was ugliness too deep to confide. With a his head still low, he clung to his humanity, pleading desperately now. Please, just leave. Now, get out of here. A realization struck Spike, causing him to stick to his belligerent mumbling. Sometimes there are two. Sometimes there are two. It's a blue moon. There were 2 moons in 1 month. There are 2. No! The mumbling turned to shouts, causing Bill to stand frozen, stricken with greater fear and worry. Confusion and terror whisked across the older man's face. He had never seen such behavior before. He leaned close again, still wanting to help. What are you saying? Bill asked. Anguished moans screeched out from Spike. He pushed his hands fiercely against the ground, trying to claw his way forward. The more he moved, the greater the amount of pain that raced through his body. He tried to push himself forward to shut the door, but instead only succeeded in clawing at it, losing control of his own hand. It was as if it was a thing possessed, or an angry cat sharpening its nails. He forced his hands back into the ground, keeping his head down. Hair covered most of his face. Only one eye became visible through the hair strands. That eye began to change, becoming bloodshot, animal-like as darkness fell into it. The eye continued to darken, furiously moving around, seeking with inadvertent movements. Piece by piece, his body became something other than his own, owned by the puppet master who pulled his strings, owned by the moon. The farmer leaned forward to catch a better glimpse. The veins in Spike's face and arms protruded in purple-blue threads. Bill could only see his arms, but couldn't deny the oddities of his son's affliction. The full face remained hidden, keeping buried the full secret of his malediction. Please leave, Spike begged. His voice gargled and growled out of him, rolling up his tongue as if he were a demon. His eyes rolled back into his head as he continued to fight himself, but the beast demanded attention. His face distorted, breaching normal human control. Spike's jaw deepened into a snarl as his mouth menacingly opened. Still kneeling on the ground, he panted heavily, trying harder and harder to stop the transformation. His fist pounded repeatedly against the new wooden floor until it drew blood. Knuckles continuously cracked under the pressure, but he kept hitting the ground, trying to extinguish the chaos inside of him. A dumb look absorbed the farmer's face. He couldn't seem to move. You have to leave now, Spike growled. Bill turned frantic and he shook his head. I can't. If you're hurt or if you're in pain, I need to know. We have to get you help. Are you poisoned? What can I do to help you? A loud, inhuman roar welled out from Spike, sending chilling shivers down Bill's back. Intuition told him to run, to leave, but his love, his caring for the boy, wouldn't let him go. He had to help his only son, just like he stood by George's sickness so long ago. He couldn't lose another son to illness. Spike's hands moved blindly, pathlessly clutching at whatever he could in the doorway, refusing to look up at the full effects of the moon. He tried to push himself back and sink further into the house, but his nails just scraped against everything around him, sending out desperate sounds of irritation. The farmer took in a deep breath and leaned down again. His back no longer blocked the moon, inevitably sending its blue intrigue directly into the house. The effects hit Spike full force. Spike's fight against himself relaxed, leaving him silently kneeling there, a stiffened statue in posture. His senses grew keen. His ears heard everything. His heart pulsed viciously. His nose moved rapidly. A voice whispered in front of him, a live figure. Spike? Spike exploded from the ground with animal speed and agility, moving so fast that he became a blur. Yellowed claws and nails pummeled into the face and throat of the farmer. A deafening, ear-shattering yell wailed out into the open night sky. Blood splashed against the walls and door. The screams continued until finally, with one last painful breath, the sound stopped. Besides the heavy breath of a predator, stillness encircled the night. Moments later, the predator crashed out of the home, ripping his way through the wooded night. He left behind a brand new almanac sitting on his coffee table next to unfinished book. That was much longer than I expected, so we can move on to Max. Are you sure? Well, this one's just a this one's shorter, but this is a science fiction world. It's a futuristic world, or kind of like along the lines of Brave New World, 1984, and things like that. And what it is there's such a level of regulation and control with people in this that they live in safe communities. They don't experience trauma like we did growing up, like falling off your bike and things like that, or seeing like horror movies and stuff. So they don't experience that anymore. So they have a cyber simulation that they do to the kids, and that's what this part is from. And let's see. As they reach the end, this drops into Linda and her sister going to pick up the children from the doctor's office. As they reached the end of the hall, they heard a sudden, terrified, childlike shrieking. "What is that?" Linda asked. Terror filled her eyes. Quickly alerted, Linda lunged towards the door where her niece and nephew were, pushing on it as she glanced inside. But the door had no button on her side to allow entry. It could only be pressure released from the inside. Linda saw Dr. Mental first, who was overlooking several screens, the contents of which she could not see. Linda moved closer, trying to angle herself to see the screens. Suddenly she gasped as she caught a glimpse of the video playing on the screen. It was a reenactment of a man committing murder with a knife. Every nasty image, every incision was real and alive. Why would he play such violent shows, she thought. Linda looked on. Across from him, all of the children in the room had white helmets attached to their heads with lenses which covered their eyes. Linda knew then that within those helmets was a screen that was poisoning the minds of these children. Several of the children continued to shriek. Among them were her niece and nephew. Linda began pounding on the door again. "Linda," Belinda said softly, but Linda didn't hear her amidst her banging. Dr. Mental looked up at her, confusion stirring across his aged face. The awful sound of children shrieking continued. Linda banged harder on the glass. "Stop that! Let me in there!" Linda shouted. "Linda," Belinda said, and a little louder this time. Linda unintentionally ignored it. The child shrieking continued. On the screen, the images flashed to car accidents, plane crashes, and buildings exploding. Linda's banging grew fiercer while the shrieking grew even more. Dr. Mental looked down at the clock and then back down again, pressing a button. The shrieking stopped. Linda watched with wide-open eyes. Dr. Mental pushed another button. The helmet slowly released, lifting off of the children. Tears waved from their eyes, and the sounds of sobs drowned out all thought. Linda pounded on the door again. Her sobbing niece and nephew looked back, shaking violently. Linda's newly discovered heart broke into billions of pieces in that moment. The kids got up from their seats and clambered towards the door. "No, no, no," Dr. Mental shouted. Now a dozen children were banging on the door in front of Linda. She wanted to pick them all up and comfort them, to soothe them. Dr. Mental came close behind them, but one of the children pushed the button from the inside, allowing them their escape. All at once, the children ran to Linda, clinging to her legs and crying just the same. Linda leaned down and swooped up her niece from the mass of them, rocking her against her own crying eyes. "Now look what you have done," Dr. Mental shouted. "You have set them all backwards. They will see you as a savior. You have ruined all progress." Linda was baffled. She looked at Belinda. Belinda said nothing, nor did she move to comfort her own children. Linda sat her niece down, moving forward from the pile of children to face the doctor. "Progress?" Linda asked. "You call this progress?" Dr. Mental swallowed hard. Linda reached a hand out and slapped him across the face. The violent display caused shock to jump across his features. Dr. Mental wiped his cheek as if he had merely been spit on. "You will pay for that," he said. Dr. Mental pushed a hidden button on his collar. A woman's voice buzzed back. "Security. I need security right now for an intruder," he said. "Yes, sir," the voice shrieked. Linda picked up her niece from the ground, comforted into her sane child again. She rocked her back and forth until security came. The officer stood there, dumbfounded by the scene. "Arrest her," Dr. Mental ordered. The officer stood there and then pushed a button on his collar and said. A buzzing sound called out before he began speaking into his shirt collar. "Controller, we have a problem here. Dr. Mental is expecting an arrest. We haven't had one of those in a very long time. I just wanted you to come and see the scene, sir," he said. A stern voice overwhelmed them. "I'll be right down," the controller said. When the controller for the family unit arrived, Linda noticed that his stature was similar to the one in her unit and his face almost as severe. To her surprise, he ignored the doctor's request for an arrest. He listened to her story in full and then directed Linda into a nearby empty room. After a short talk with her, he went back to Dr. Mental. "Given the circumstances of Linda Taggart's recent trauma, we've decided not to press charges or arrest this time. But she does agree to stay away from your department and your research. We are sorry about the inconvenience," the controller said. Dr. Mental said nothing. Instead, he grumbled and walked away. Belinda still stood in the corner, now holding hands with both of her children. She looked at Linda as if she were a stranger, while her children looked at her as if that she were a savior. In that moment, Linda herself didn't know which one she was.